start on the agenda, number 1, as required by section 311, title 25 of the Oklahoma statutes, notice is hereby given. The Board of Education of Independent School District number 4, Tulsa County, Oklahoma will hold a special meeting on Wednesday, February 16th, 2022 at 5 p.m. at the BPS Administrative Center, 109 North Armstrong, Bixby, Oklahoma. Number 2, roll call. Julie Prox. Here. Christy Fryer. Here. Justin Cheatham.
Here.
Matt Dotson.
Here.
And the chair is here. 3, Board President will read the statement of procedures. The reason for this meeting is to hear the appeal from the committee's recommendation of retention of books titled 13 Reasons Why and Me and Earl and the Dying Girl in the Bixby High School Library. The appeal hearing will follow the agenda of this meeting. This agenda provides an opportunity for both the parent and administration to present information for the board's consideration in determining whether one or both of the books identified should be removed from the Bixby High School Library. Each side is limited to 15 minutes to make their presentation. This hearing is an informal administrative appeal that will not be governed by the strict rules of evidence such as those that we used in a court proceeding. Thus, the Board of Education may hear statements from both parties, including a review of documents and or exhibits having merit in support of either side's position. Only the parent or their designee, if any, will be addressing the board, and thus no statements from anyone in the audience will be heard. The superintendent's designee, Ms. Jamie Milligan, is present. The parent, Ms. Danforth, is present. Do the board members or the parties or the representatives have any questions concerning the procedures of the hearing? Okay. So we're gonna now hear from Ms. Danforth right after I read number 4 on the number 4 is presentation by parent on information contesting the committee's decision finding the designated books should remain in the Bixby High School Library. Limited to 15 minutes. Following the presentation, the Board of Education may ask questions relating to the information presented by parent Ms. Danforth.
So, do I just holler out? Do I hold this
You
out?
are welcome to sit, you can pull it, you can stand, whatever's the easiest for you. And please just tell Sherry when you're ready and she'll start the clock.
Probably, Zach.
You don't
does
have to
that
talk
help?
right into it.
Yeah, I can hear, we
Okay.
can hear you good.
Okay. Let me set mine too, so I have.
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready. We are here today to discuss books. I am a lover of books and an avid reader. I read both fiction and nonfiction alike. I read fiction for the escape and nonfiction to expand my knowledge. I believe both are important. In fact, recently I checked out Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, not because I support communism, quite the opposite. But for me to understand Marxism a little more, I know I need to read more about it. If I was a supporter of banning books, this would likely be one I would enjoy getting rid of altogether. Marxism is a terrible ideology and has done nothing to advance any civilization. But we have the First Amendment under our Constitution. I have the right to read that book, and public libraries and bookstores have the right to sell or loan it out. The same would be true of the books we're discussing here tonight. I do not deny the importance of our First Amendment and the rights for these authors to have their books sold at a bookstore or loaned out via the public libraries. Any parent has a right to have access to these books that are up for debate tonight via these alternative routes. Nobody is denying them access. I do, however, see it differently in a public education setting, a place that educates children. The public education system does a whole lot of monitoring and censoring in general. They monitor the food that goes into students' mouths. They monitor and censor the websites they have access to on the internet via their Chromebooks. They monitor and censor what words they can use in the hallways at school. They monitor what clothing they wear. They monitor and censor when smoking was of legal age at 18, that they weren't able to do that at school. They monitor physical contact between students, but they don't see the need to monitor or censor what they provide students to read and fill their minds with. Why is that? A student's mind is his or her greatest asset. It's why we are here in the first place, to nurture it, to grow it. So why does the administration feel it is okay to fill it with filth, with vulgarity, and with obscenity? I have spent countless hours reading articles, studying the law, discussing this issue with multiple administrators, hearing their defense, and then hearing mine. We seem to be on opposite sides in regards to what is appropriate in a public education institution for children. Tonight, we're bringing to light 2 books, But believe me when I tell you, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is a problem not just at BPS, but in most schools within Tulsa County, Oklahoma, and across the United States. Which begs to ask why public institutions who are supposed to be educating our children are deciding this type of material is appropriate to be in their hands. So first off, I'm going to talk a bit about freedom of speech. It does not include the right to make or distribute obscene materials. This we know through Roth versus United States via 1957 Supreme Court case. Giving the definition of obscene, it's offensive to accepted standards of decency, of or relating to materials that can be regulated or criminalized because their depiction of nudity, sex is patently offensive and without artistic or scientific value. It is morally repulsive and disgusting. We also have another Supreme Court case, the Board of Education versus PICO. In this case, in the 80s, Justice Brennan noted that his decision was limited to the removal of the books from a school library and not extending to the acquisition of the books of their use. But we'll get to what that really means. He also recognized that the local school board, you guys, have broad discretion in the management of school affairs, and that if a board acted solely upon educational suitability of the books in question, or solely because the books were pervasively vulgar, such actions would not be unconstitutional. Since PICO, First Amendment litigation involving book censorship in schools has usually turned on the rights of a school board to control classroom curricula by prohibiting the use of certain texts in inquiry into whether a certain challenged text is vulgar. So what is vulgar? It's lacking in cultivation or taste, it's coarse, morally crude, undeveloped, gross, offensive in language, lewdly or profanely indecent. Constitutionally acceptable motivations can be shown if the books are removed because they are deemed pervasively vulgar or educationally unsuitable. These motives do not threaten to suppress ideas and therefore are constitutionally permissible. With the information stated above regarding the Supreme Court case, it clearly shows that these two books are not protected under the First Amendment. The reason being is I'm not asking for the suppression of idea or thought. The topics of cancer and suicide, of which the subject of these books is, I completely agree are acceptable. The motive behind the removal is for their vulgarity and being sexually explicit and obscene. Neither book discussed tonight, therefore, are educationally suitable in my eyes. In the Bixby handbook, on page 25, you guys say language, profane, vulgar, and racist language is unacceptable. Clothing, on page 8, obscene, lewd, violent, sexually suggestive slogans or graphics are not allowed. We also have a Parent Bill of Rights here in Oklahoma. It's an Oklahoma statute, Title 25. All parental rights are reserved to a parent of a minor child without obstruction or interference from the state, any political subdivision of the state, or any other government entity. This includes but is not limited to the following: the right to direct the education of the minor child, the right to direct the upbringing of the minor child, and the right to direct the moral or religiously training of the minor child. We also have in Oklahoma an obscenity law, Title 21 Oklahoma statute. We are blessed to be one of 7 states in the union that has an obscenity law in place. There's a court case, Miller versus California from 1973, which was decided and held that obscene material is not protected by the First Amendment and set forth the standards that Oklahoma follows today. This law is to protect children, minors, from being exposed to material that would otherwise be criminal. Exposing our children to sex at too early of an age can be damaging. In fact, I found a study that showed a significant increase in pregnancy, 10 times more in students who had been subjected to sexually explicit material too young. This young adult genre is filled with sexually explicit, obscene material. It should not be. The best question to ask yourself is, why are these authors, dozens of them, deciding to write this crap? Why do we need to subject children to adult themes? And the answer here at Bixby is we do not. Tonight, you as a board get to make the decision to get rid of these books filled with obscenity. 13 Reasons Why has a very descriptive rape scene, very descriptive. It's obscene, it's pornographic. Me and Earl has multiple conversations relating to sex and talks about eating pussy. That is obscene and it's pornographic. Teens have a lack of experience emotionally, and there are enormous emotional changes taking place during those years. Teens' hormones are raging and will be aroused at the slightest mention of a sexual experience, possibly setting the stage or planting a seed for interest in sex that may not have been there otherwise. Do you want that on your conscience when you have the ability to take it away? These children deserve to be protected, they deserve better, and that is why I'm here today. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about words. So in Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, the word shit is used 87 times in 23 chapters. The F word, I won't say that out loud because I just can't do it, is used 114 times through 23 chapters. Those two words alone combined 201 times. The lexile if you look at Exhibit A, I have there, you can see the national student norms, and they do this by the end of spring, the 50th percentile, the 90th. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl is labeled at 820. That's a 3rd grade reading level. 13 Reasons Why is 550, a 2nd grade reading level. Why are we having teens in high school? If they're writing it at that level and it's an adult theme, I see a problem, and that's where there's a disconnect here. The American Library Association and the Major Motion Picture Association is another area I'd like to talk about. So on the ALA website, they say if the individual is concerned about a child's or young adult's resource, explain that parents and guardians play a major role in guiding their child's reading and library use. If this statement above is true according to the ALA, and it's known via my conversations with the administration that the librarian uses the ALA as a resource for her decision making, then why do we not have something in place for parents to know what their child is reading? What are ways for us as parents to know what our child have their hands on? Also, according to the ALA, they don't agree with censoring any book. So where's the line for a public education institution? If all books, according to the ALA, are protected under the First Amendment and are not limited by age, it sounds like there is no line. But is that true here at Bixby? Do we have limits to what enters through our gatekeepers of books? If so, what are those guidelines? What is appropriate and what is not? Why is one person deciding what is appropriate and what is inappropriate for our children? Not to mention there's no way one person can vet all the books. It's not humanly possible, which allows for a huge hole of questionable books to fall through. And just because a book receives an award is hardly a reason to vet it. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl received several awards. Really? With over 200 curse words, a lot of crude talk, and written at a 3rd grade level, how in the world is that worthy of an award? I have handed you papers, Exhibit B, explaining how the motion picture industry decides movies are rated. Please notice the highlighted section under PG-13. One expletive, one, would be allowed for it to be in the category of PG-13. Me and the Earl and the Dying Girl has 114 F-bombs. This book, if made into a movie, would be rated R. It would not be allowed to be viewed on any school campus here or anywhere across the country. So why then is the same material as a book allowed without restrictions in our libraries? Did you know too that the motion picture industry is not required to rate their movies? They choose to, because they choose to inform parents and have been doing so since 1968. To quote from their website, the film rating system provides parents with the information needed to determine if a film is appropriate for their children. And their board is comprised of an independent group of parents. The rating system is not determined by the Motion Picture Association, directors, actors, or anyone else that works in that industry. So as to be unbiased and fair, they have chosen parents, just parents, to make up that board. Let that sink in for a moment. But the ALA doesn't support a rating system. According to their website, they do not think it's appropriate to add ratings because these rating systems are devised, and I'm quoting, by private groups using subjective and changing criteria to advise people of suitability or content of materials. It is the library's responsibility to prevent the imposition of endorsement of private rating systems, including such ratings in the bibliographic record, library records and such, would predispose people's attitudes towards the material and thus violating the Library Bill of Rights. In my discussion with the administration, however, a rating system was one idea we agreed could maybe work, but the ALA doesn't even agree with that, and according to the librarian, according to the administration, that's what they use. So while there are ideas out there to better educate parents as to books, what could be in the hands, a couple of options to ponder. One is the rating system. If the administration decides to choose this route, I believe it's fair to have diverse thought and perspective on this committee. Choosing only individuals who think alike will not serve justice to our community. Groupthink is detrimental. I also am concerned that books that are obscene and vulgar still have a place on the shelf. Another option which we started and agreed to initially was a material review committee. To me, this is the best route. It limits these types of books from gaining access in the library at all and has more than one person vetting. This option also does not violate the First Amendment per Justice Brennan. A school may decide to admit a book or not without the First Amendment being violated. This was the idea we originally had come to. And as I stated in that first case, Pico versus this school, that's what he said, is we can put them in and not have to worry about, the First Amendment, if you do or don't. In my opinion, there are too many associations that are making decisions what's best for them, not what's best for us. We are unique. We are not a one-size-fits-all approach. It just doesn't work. We need to move away from listening to associations like OSSBA that create policies, or the American Library Association that create criteria for books in our libraries. They have an agenda. I have yet to see a successful story related to public education having ties to any of these types of entities. I've read articles even from 30 years ago that show the same terrible trap these have caused our system. Education should be quite simple. Kids, parents, teachers, classrooms, reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and gym. The end. Adding more doesn't add more. More common sense and critical thinking skills need to make a comeback. Facts over feelings. For my final thought, as a board, it would be erroneous to keep these books in our libraries with the hope or idea of some sort of new system related to transparency of the material being implemented, because today we have no such system. Therefore, your vote should be based on what the access to the student is today, not what it could be. I look forward to getting your vote on the record. Thank you for your time, and thanks to everyone that's here today from the community, from both sides. I much appreciate it. This is a great thing that we have to talk about, and I'm hopeful we can continue this conversation, whatever the decision is today, to move on to something successful that works. The end.
Thank you very much. Number 5, presentation by the committee's chair and or superintendent on information supporting the committee's decision that the designated book should remain in the Bixby High School Library, limited to 15 minutes, following the I'm sorry. We have to ask questions. I got ahead of myself. So we have time to ask questions to Ms. Danforth after her presentation. If anyone has a question, go ahead.
My question is, as a parent, I appreciate your concerns and definitely bringing those to the school board. I know each of us are parents, and so it definitely, when there's a concern, I think that's important. How did you become aware of these books? Did your child check them out in the library?
The 13 Reasons Why, my son did. He actually brought that to my attention. I had seen the Me and Earl and the Dying Girl I saw online, and it was before I was in Moms for Liberty. I had been seeing some things happening, which is actually part of sparked that as well, was like seeing things that I didn't like. But 13 Reasons Why, my son checked that book out, and he read it over last summer. And he actually told me when I saw the Earl one, he said, "Mom, I have a worse one for you." He said, "I liked the book, and then when it got to the rape scene, he stopped reading it because it made him feel like he felt like he shouldn't feel." And so he, as a 14-year-old, was uncomfortable with what he was reading and didn't know that was in there. And I didn't know he was reading. I didn't think to look at books. I'm thinking it's young adult, but I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. I was wrong.
I have just one quick question. Did your son feel that there was any way for him to kind of get an idea of what the book was about before he started reading it? Or is it something that they start reading and like you said, like, hey, I didn't realize.
Yeah, there's really not. I mean, you can go to like Common Sense Media. Once you start looking for what do these books have, and it's really hard, and we talked about this in our meetings, is you have to really dig to find the bad stuff. It's not just out there like, oh, look, here it is. So you won't know. Even Common Sense Media, which I feel, as for movies, does a really good job of giving you the idea of what's in them. But for books, and I think it's because there's no rating system, there's no way to know. It's just free for all. They may say, I mean, even Common Sense Media on both of those doesn't really give you any sense of what's actually in it.
Were either of these books assigned to your child?
No, they were not.
Okay.
This was by choice.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you for your time and for coming and presenting your case to us. And as you say, we remove these books,
Sure.
moving forward, how would you like to see Bixby Public School be transparent or more transparent when it comes to checking out books, to our children, because like you said in your statement, it's nearly impossible for us to catch everything.
Yeah, I don't
And,
expect anyone could.
Words and things that are used in certain books when it comes to colorful language or offensive language, also, you know, I have 4 children of my own in the district, and so it's, you know, I don't want my kids to hear those words. I try to
Right.
shield my kids from hearing those words. But as a parent and trying to think about the community, you know, you have to think about, you know, what's offensive to you might not be offensive to someone else. And I'm not saying I agree with that or not, but I'm just saying that's
Yeah,
a
that's an
perspective,
argument,
that's an argument.
Mhm.
However, moving forward, how would you like to see our school district handle checking out resources to our kids?
I mean, I would prefer limiting what comes in. That aside, if I don't have that option, I think one option that I thought would be helpful is that when books are checked out, there's an email that goes to the parent alerting them to that. Right now, I have no idea when either of my sons checks out a book, I don't get anything, and maybe there is something, but I've never had it. And I think we need to know, there has to be some kind of system in place when there's, you know, like my son checked out that book and there's a rape scene in there, and it's like, I don't raise my kids to read that crap, okay? I don't want them reading it. My son made that choice on his own to stop reading it because I'm raising him in that way. But not every kid has that luxury of, you know, some kids aren't necessarily in the greatest home or whatever, and they're not gonna necessarily get a parent that's gonna respond. And so that's the other part of it too, is there has to be a way for not only the parent, but also the school to have a system in place where a book is above their level emotionally, or curse words or whatever that we say, there's some kind of a system, a flagging system to alert. And I don't know how the best way to implement that would be, but I believe that it has to happen. I mean, it's just, the books are getting worse and worse. I mean, we have found dozens of books that are just terrible. I mean, worse than these two. And kids don't need to be reading that kind of stuff willy-nilly where nobody has a clue that they're even reading it. I can't go and say, okay, before you read it, I can't take the time, nobody can, right? I'm not gonna read a 200-300 page book before my son reads it. It will take me forever. You know, I mean, I have a whole life going on. Most parents both work. So there has to be some kind of thing put into place. And I think having a committee, and like I mentioned, like, not just picking who you want to be on it. And I've mentioned this, I don't like the bias. It feels that way whether they agree with me or not. There has to be another thought in there. Someone like myself, and I volunteered to be a part of it, I want to. But they don't necessarily want that other thought. I was even objected from being a part of this rating system. I asked to be a part of it, and no, I just get to see what they decide. Well, why can't I be a part of it? You know, stop doing this, like, we have one thing in place and we can't go outside of that. That's where all these policies and rules that come in from associations, I feel like it limits what can happen here. Mr. Miller and I came up with I feel like it was gonna be a great possibility, but then I feel like they go talk to their lawyers and OSSBA and all that stuff, and then it changes. Well, because they don't know what's best for our community. They're doing what's best based on what they think is best for their association or their law, whatever their agenda is. But Bixby's agenda isn't gonna be the same. It's just not. It's not gonna be the same as TPS. You know, we're just different than anywhere. Every school system is unique, and I think you have to appreciate that fact. And I feel like we just get kind of lumped into that. But I think we have to have some sort of vetting that's more than one person. And I even said this to them with the librarian. There's no way she can vet all these books. It's not even possible. I can't blame her. I can't be mad at her. She's doing her best job that she can do with what resources she has. But there's holes, there's things missing, and we need to be aware of that and fix it. and I think it's fixable. I think we just have to brainstorm ideas, but we need multiple ideas, so we're not in that group thing where it's just echo chamber, everyone who has the same idea, and that's all we're looking at. I have a different idea, I have a different perspective, and I think that should be appreciated, because I sit here, but I have a lot of parents behind me, here physically and not, that feel the same way that I do. So I'm not alone in my, you may think I'm, you know, some crazy person, but I'm not. I'm just a concerned parent who has a lot of parents that feel the same way. Trust me, I'm not alone.
Follow-up question of that. If we had, now we don't, this is hypothetical, because we do not have a system for grading or notifying.
Yes.
If we had a system in place that was efficient and worked well, would you still want these books removed, or would you be okay with these books being in place if we had a sufficient system that would notify parents of what kind of material that their children have access to?
That's a loaded question. I don't know, I think there are certain books that don't have a place, but if I don't get that choice, and we have to come up with something else, then I'll do what we have to do. I'm not gonna be up here and be Hitler either. I know that I'm one of, you know, however many students we have here, I'm one of how many parents. I know there's a diverse thought in how people see this, I'm not naive to that, and I'm open to coming up with something, but I think it's important that I'm part of it, or someone that thinks similar to me, so that we can feel like we're being heard, and that there's something that can work for both sides of the aisle here. You know, I'm not trying to say, you know, fist on and Miller even said, when we met, like, I'm so glad you don't come in here and, I don't want that, I wanna work together, so however we figure that out, but I want to.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, 5 now, presentation of the committee's chair and or superintendent on information supporting the committee's decision that the designated book should remain in Bixby High School Library, limited to 15 minutes. Following the presentation, the Board of Education may ask questions about the information presented. You're up, Ms. Milliken.
Thank you. In front of you is a folder containing the original complaint, the committee's response, slides of a process that we will review in a minute, and legal opinions. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to address the board and to represent the appeal committee. This committee included 3 administrators, including myself, 2 parents, 1 media specialist, and 3 teachers. The committee was provided a copy of our policy for selection of materials, 3105, along with information on the First Amendment. Each member was given ample time to review the books in question to acquire firsthand knowledge and to be able to articulately respond to each objection. During the committee meeting, members had the opportunity to share their perspectives of each book individually. As you can see from the committee's report, the committee was thorough in documenting a response to the objections set forth by Mrs. Danforth. Each objection was reviewed and discussed, and the committee responded to the objections based on the committee's knowledge of information about the books in question, our policy, and the law. Let me start by addressing the review of the 2 books. Although the committee recognized that some scenes of 13 Reasons Why were difficult to read, by definition, the book is not pornographic. The committee also disagreed with the claim that the book glorifies suicide. Instead, this book illustrates the haunting aftermath of suicide, alongside lessons for teenagers on the importance of treating one another with kindness. The committee members also acknowledged that this book was made into a Netflix series. Several committee members who also had seen the series reported the book and the series deviate in content in numerous areas. Members of our community should not watch the series and assume the book is accurately depicted in it. 13 Reasons Why has been on the shelf at the high school since 2015 and at the 9th grade center since 2017. It has been checked out at the high school 16 times and at the 9th grade center 4 times. It should also be noted that this book was selected for the Sequoia Master List and went on to win the award in 2010. Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl does contain profanity. The committee felt that some students have the maturity to deal with the language. There are illegal drugs that are accidentally ingested by the characters, and later in the book, The instance becomes part of the lessons of anti-drug use. There's also an objection by Mrs. Danforth relative to the discussion between characters which reference sexual content. The committee agreed that although some of the language is crude and crass, the conversation is actually the opposite of sexual. The author uses this particular scene to illustrate the level of inexperience and immaturity of the characters. This immaturity is highlighted throughout the book and is part of the lessons conveyed. This book, at its heart, is a coming-of-age story tackling lessons of loss and grief through the story of a young girl fighting leukemia. Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl has been on the shelf at the high school since 2017 and has been checked out 5 times. It should be noted that this title was also on the list of best fiction for young adults from the American Library Association in 2013. To give more context into the media specialist material selection process, both books were reviewed through the scope of the media specialist expertise, keeping in mind our community and the students who are represented in our schools. Media specialists must hold at least a master's degree in library sciences from the American Library Association or the American Association of School Librarians accredited schools. Standard 2.1 of the ALA Standard of Accreditation of Master's Program in Library and Information Studies states that in order for a program to be accredited, it must foster, and I quote, development of library and information professionals who will assume a leadership role in providing services and collections appropriate for communities that are served. American Association of School Librarians follows the same practices, declaring that librarians must use, and I quote, they must use evaluation criteria and selection tools to develop, curate, organize, and manage a collection designed to meet the diverse curricular and personal needs of the learning community. To put that into perspective and how it's implemented at BPS, our media specialists follow district policy for criteria for selection of library materials and resources. In selecting materials for purchase, the media specialist evaluates the existing collection and consults reputable, unbiased, professionally prepared selection aids. According to policy, media specialists shall use the criteria from our board policy as a guide for selecting and purchasing library materials and resources. You have a copy of that policy. The selection aids that are used as review journals include resources like the School Library Journal, Book List, Publishers Weekly, Kirkus Review, the Horn Book, magazine. It includes award lists such as the Oklahoma Sequoia List, the Redbud List, and various ALA Best Of lists, the Newbery Award, the Caldecott Award, etc. And student and or teacher book requests. Any book requested by stakeholders are vetted according to the same standards as other materials. If there is not a clear consensus among these resources, then media specialists either do not order the material in question or read it through the lens of our board policy to add to our collection. If any review indicates an area of concern or that might be outside the community norm, they read the entire book before selecting or rejecting it. After meeting with the librarians numerous times through the process, it is apparent that they are very cognizant of the population they serve. They do their best to keep a balanced collection by choosing material which represent varied viewpoints. They are highly qualified professionals who take these responsibilities seriously. They strive to serve their students and in turn our community well, while ensuring each and every student is represented in our schools. Relative to pertinent legal and case law, I have provided a handout as a reference to some Supreme Court decisions that govern collection development, the First Amendment, and the body of Supreme Court decisions. 2 cases to note that are highlighted in your packet. The first one is Read to Read Defense Committee, which is against a school out of Massachusetts. The committee decided to bar from the high school a library high school library a poetry anthology called Male and Female Under 18, because it included what they deemed offensive and damaging poem. But in the judge's ruling, and I'm going to quote him, he said, "The library is a mighty resource in the marketplace of ideas. There, a student can literally explore the unknown and discover areas of interest and thought not covered by prescribed curriculum. The student who discovers the magic of the library is on the way to a lifelong experience of self-education and enrichment. That student learns that a library is a place to test or expand upon ideas presented to him in or out of the classroom. The most effective antidote to the poison of mindless orthodoxy is ready access to a broad sweep of ideas and philosophy. There is no danger from such exposure. The danger is in mind control." The second case that I would like to bring your attention is out of Kansas. A board voted to remove a book, Annie on My Mind, a novel depicting a lesbian relationship between two teenagers, and from the district's junior and senior high school libraries. The federal court in Kansas found that they violated the students' rights under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution and the corresponding provisions of the Kansas State Constitution. Despite the fact that the school board testified that they removed the book because of educational unsuitability, which is within their rights under the PICO decision, it became obvious from their testimony that the book was removed because they disapproved of the book's ideology. In addition, it was found that the school board had violated their own materials selection and reconsideration policy, which weighed heavily in the judge's decision. Beyond these rulings, the United States has largely deferred to local control of policies and regulations concerning the selection of library materials. The standards for accreditation of Oklahoma schools directs collection development practices to be guided by, and I quote, "a written policy approved by the local board concerning the criteria to be used in the evaluation and selection of materials for the media program. The written policy should contain criteria for selection responsibilities for that selection and guidelines for consideration," which once again leads us directly back to our own board policy as reviewed earlier. As the committee discussed and unanimously voted to keep these books on the shelf, we have also discussed the rights of parents to advocate for their children. I truly valued the opportunity to work with and discuss this issue with Mrs. Danforth. The committee, along with myself, recognized her advocacy for her child. As a school district, we know everyone wins when we partner with parents successfully, and I commend her for her thoughtful parenting, determined advocacy, and willingness to partner with us. Even though the committee does not believe these books should be removed from circulation for all students, and that allowing them to remain is in alignment with our school's policy and the First Amendment, the district does recognize each parent's right to guide their own children. As it states in our own policy, a parent has the right to request his or her child be exempted from the use of the library media materials and resources which seem incompatible with the students' or parents' values or beliefs. It is recommended that the classroom assignments involving library media materials and resources provide alternative choices. But individual parents may not, however, determine the reading of, listening to, or viewing of materials for students other than their own children. That's from our policy. With that said, we have been working on a way for parents to have increased autonomy relative to the books their student is able to check out. Together, we have devised procedures for parents to review our library catalogs and communicate with our media specialists. Maricela, if you'll bring up the slide. This format will look differently as we post it to our website, but we wanted you all to be able to review the content procedures as we discuss this appeal today. The second slide, Maricela, with the link. This slide, with all the, no, one more back. This slide actually leads you to Destiny, the second slide. Yes, there we go. It leads you to Destiny that houses, each school's library. And so every parent can have access, and we post this on our website. This portion would allow parents to browse the library catalog at each school site with the purpose of checking, for titles of concern. The next slide. And they would have this, they could review it against this list of resources that parents can use to decide if a book is right for their child. Of course, parents are able to use any resources they prefer to review titles of concern. However, we want to provide a place to start for parents who may need one. Next slide. This process provides an avenue for parents who wish to have more autonomy over their students' library book selection. From the parent side, this means completing a simple form to indicate they wish to do so. From there, the media specialist will provide parents with a login, allowing them access to the catalog system for the purpose of choosing books and placing them on hold or reserve for their student. This shifts the checkout process from access to the parent instead of to the student. Media specialists would be notified of these holds or reservations and can then check the selected titles out to the student. Students to whom these procedures apply will not be able to partake in self-checkout, but will still have access to library materials with parental approval. In conclusion, the district recommends supporting the committee's decision that 13 Reasons Why and Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl remain in circulation. The district supports our policy that states a parent has the right to request his or her child be exempted, but no parent has the right to determine access for students other than their own. We believe the recommended procedure meets policy, upholds the constitutional standards, and respects the rights of all parents.